The air in the conclave of the Elder Consortium was as still and cold as the void between galaxies. It was a constructed stillness, a silence born not of peace, but of a tension so profound it seemed to warp the very fabric of the chamber. High above, in the cavernous dome of polished obsidian, holographic nebulae swirled in silent, majestic mimicry of the cosmos, their light casting long, skeletal shadows across the tiered amphitheater. Here sat the representatives of the known sentient galaxy, beings of crystal, of gas, of flesh, and of thought, all unified by a single, paralyzing fear. At the chamber's heart, suspended in a column of pure energy, hung the source of that fear, the image of a ship. It was a vessel of impossible geometry, a spearhead of a metal that drank light and offered no reflection. Its lines were both brutally primitive and impossibly advanced, a paradox given form. It was a warship, undeniably so. Its silhouette bristled with weapon emplacements that defied conventional classification. Its hull pulsed with an energy signature that screamed of contained stellar fire. But this warship shouldn't exist. High Lord Kalen of the Cathar Imperium leaned forward, his four powerful arms resting on the cool, living stone of his delegation's dais. His chitinous plates, the color of a dying star, shifted with a barely audible rasp. His people were warriors, born of a high-gravity world where strength was the only truth. They had conquered star systems, shattered moons, and brought empires to their knees. Kalen had witnessed the fury of 1,000 battles, yet the silent image of this single, motionless vessel filled him with a cold dread his warrior's soul had never known. For 3 cycles, it had hung in the void at the edge of consortium space, a silent, unmoving sentinel. It answered no hails. It broadcasted no identification. Simply was. The data remains unchanged, a voice chimed, devoid of inflection or emotion. It belonged to the Signian delegate Xyler, a being of pure logic encased in a shimmering, columnar energy field. Material analysis indicates the hull is composed of a metallic isotope that, by our understanding of stellar nucleosynthesis, could only have been forged in the heart of a star that died billions of years before this galaxy's formation. It is, for all intents and purposes, primordial matter. Yet the energy signature emanating from its core is consistent with a stabilized K-type singularity, a technology we have only theorized. The vessel is both ancient and impossibly futuristic. It is a logical contradiction. Kalen's mandibles clicked in frustration. He detested the Signian's dry recitation of facts. It stripped the situation of its visceral horror. This was not a puzzle to be solved. It was a threat to be neutralized. A contradiction with the power to sterilize a planet, Kalen growled, his voice a low rumble that echoed in the vast chamber. We have focused our entire strategic armada on that sector, a fleet that has pacified rebellions and deterred invaders for millennia. And this ghost sits there, unmoved, unimpressed. It watches us as a predator watches its prey, waiting for a sign of weakness. It has displayed no hostile intent, countered a soft, melodic voice that seemed to weave itself from the ambient light. It was Olena of the Lumina, a psionic species that perceived reality as a symphony of consciousness. Her form was a gentle, humanoid shape of swirling, pearlescent light. But its presence is hollow. Where there should be the psychic echo of a crew, their thoughts, their fears, their lives, there is only a profound silence, a void. It is like a tomb floating in the dark. A tomb. The word hung in the air, resonating with a truth that unsettled Kalen more than any threat of violence. He had seen tombs before, the grand monuments his people erected for their fallen heroes. They were places of honor, of memory. This felt different. This felt like a wound in the fabric of space, bleeding silence and a deep, ancient sorrow. Hostile intent is irrelevant when capability is absolute, Kalen argued, rising to his full, intimidating height. The nebulae above cast his shadow over the lower tiers. Every moment we debate, we grant this unknown entity the strategic advantage. It observes our fleet movements, analyzes our patrol vectors, learns our protocols. We speak of its origins, of its composition, while it prepares to strike. I say again what I have said since this anomaly first appeared. We must act. A preemptive strike. Overwhelm it with the full force of the consortium. Erase this paradox before it erases us. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of dissent and agreement. The delegates of smaller, more cautious species argued for diplomacy, for patience. The more militaristic factions roared their support for Kalen's proposal. The Signian remained silent, processing variables. Olena's light seemed to dim, as if pained by the rising tid. Of aggression. The debate raged, a storm of fear and pride, of logic and instinct. They argued over the ship's potential origins. Was it a relic of a precursor race, a long-dormant weapon now awakened? Was it an extragalactic invader, the vanguard of a force beyond their comprehension? Or was it something else entirely, a phenomenon that defied their understanding of life and technology? Throughout the debate, one name was spoken only in hushed, dismissive tones: human. The species was a recent addition to the galactic stage, a bipedal race of startling contradictions. They were fragile, short-lived creatures of flesh and bone, yet they had expanded from their single star system with a speed that was alarming. Their technology was inconsistent, in some areas primitive, in others shockingly advanced. They were emotional, irrational, prone to internal conflict. They had been granted associate status in the consortium out of a cautious curiosity, but they were not considered a serious power. Their territory lay in the opposite quadrant of the galaxy, far from the silent warship. They were, by all accounts, irrelevant to this crisis. "They are a chaotic variable," Xyler stated with finality, its columnar form flickering as it accessed its vast data archives. "Their psychological profile is unstable. They exhibit a capacity for both profound empathy and extreme violence that is statistically anomalous. To involve them would be to introduce an unpredictable element into an already volatile equation." Kalen agreed. He had reviewed the files on humanity himself. He'd watched recordings of their internal wars, of their art, of their philosophies. It was a chaotic mess of self-contradiction. They built monuments to peace with one hand and deadlier weapons with the other. They wrote poetry about the sanctity of life, and then engaged in systematic industrial slaughter of their own kind over trivial matters of belief or territory. They were infants, playing with fire in the grand, ancient nursery of the galaxy. They had no place in this discussion. As the arguments reached a fever pitch, a low, resonant chime cut through the noise, silencing the entire conclave. It was the signal for a priority communication, one that bypassed all protocol. Every delegate turned their attention to the grand communication plate at the chamber's front. An attendant drone, a simple, non-sentient machine, floated out and activated the sequence. A wave of confusion washed over the assembly. The communication was not from the Fleet Command, nor from any of the core worlds. The origin code was human. Before anyone could protest, the plate shimmered and a figure resolved into view. It was a single human female, standing in what appeared to be the stark, minimalist bridge of a small vessel. She was dressed in a simple, dark blue uniform, devoid of rank or insignia. Her face was calm, her expression serene. There was no fear in her eyes, no arrogance, only a quiet, unnerving stillness. Behind her, through a viewport, the impossible warship was visible, hanging in the black, a monstrous silhouette against the distant stars. The implication was staggering. This tiny, insignificant human vessel was right there, in the shadow of the very thing that had the entire consortium military on high alert. "My name is Eva Rostova, ambassador of the Terran Confederacy," she said, her voice calm and clear, translated instantly into the native tongue of every species present. "I apologize for this unscheduled intrusion into your conclave. I understand you have been discussing the vessel you have designated Anomaly 1. We call it the Vigil Asterisk." Kalen felt a surge of rage. The audacity to approach the anomaly directly, to bypass the consortium blockade, to interrupt their most sacred council. "You have violated restricted military space, human," he thundered, his voice shaking the dais. "Your reckless actions could have triggered a conflict that would engulf this entire galactic arm. Withdraw your vessel immediately, or the consortium fleet will be forced to." "We will not be withdrawing," the human ambassador said, her tone unchanged. There was no defiance in her voice, simply a statement of fact. She looked directly at Kalen, her gaze unflinching. "And the Vigil will not harm you. It will not harm anyone. It is not here to wage a war." "Then what is its purpose?" Xyler interjected, its energy field pulsing with analytical curiosity. "Our scans indicate it possesses firepower sufficient to destroy a solar system. A tool of that magnitude has only one logical function: conquest or deterrence." Eva Rostova held the Signian's incorporeal gaze. A faint, almost imperceptible sadness touched her lips. "Its purpose is to remember," she said softly. The chamber fell silent again, a different kind of silence this time. A silence of profound, absolute confusion. Kalen stared at the human's image. Remember, a warship of that scale, a weapon of that power was a memorial. The concept was so alien, so utterly illogical that his mind struggled to process it. It was an insult to the very meaning of a warship. A warship was a projection of power, a symbol of strength and dominance. It was an instrument of the will. To use such a thing for a passive act like remembering was a perversion, a waste. "Explain," Kalen demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "The Vigil Asterisk shouldn't exist," Eva Rostova began, her words echoing the very sentiment that had haunted the conclave for cycles. "You are correct in that assessment. Your scans of its hull are also correct. The The material it is forged from is older than this galaxy. But it was not forged in a dying star. It was forged in the dying fires of a war, our war. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the chamber. Kalen felt a cold unease creep up his spine. The humans were a young race. What war could they have possibly fought that would require a monument of such terrifying scale? You have studied our history, Rostova continued, her gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates as if seeing into the minds of each and every one. You have seen our paradoxes, our capacity for creation and destruction. You see us as young, chaotic, unpredictable. You are not wrong, but you see only the surface. You see the echoes of a fire, but you do not comprehend the scale of the inferno that forged us. We nearly extinguished ourselves, not by an alien invasion, not by a natural cataclysm, but by our own hands. She gestured behind her, toward the viewport showing the Titanic ship. The Vigil Asterisk is a monument to the Terran Extinction War, a conflict that burned across our home system for 2 centuries. A war where ideologies and hatred became forces more destructive than collapsing stars. We turned technologies meant to build worlds into instruments for shattering them. We engineered plagues to wipe out our own subspecies. We fought in the cradle of our civilization until the cradle itself was broken. Billions of our own kind perished. Our homeworld, Earth, was left a scorched, radioactive tomb, uninhabitable for 1,000 years. Olena of the Lumina let out a soft cry, a wave of psionic grief washing through the chamber. Kalen stood rigid, his warrior's pride warring with a growing sense of horror. He had seen brutal wars, but what the human described was not war. It was a form of species-level suicide. It was madness. Why? Kalen asked, the single word a raw expression of his utter incomprehension. What cause could possibly justify such self-destruction? That is the question that defines us now, Eva replied, her voice filled with an ancient weariness. There was no single cause. There were thousands. Beliefs, resources, pride, fear. In the end, the reasons ceased to matter. The conflict developed its own momentum, its own terrible logic. We became a species consumed by a fire of its own making. The war only ended when we were on the brink of total, irreversible extinction. The few survivors, scattered across orbital habitats and fledgling colonies, looked back at what they had done at the silent, poisoned Earth, and they made a promise. A covenant that would become the new foundation of our entire civilization. Never again. The humans' words were not a boast. They were a confession. A raw, unvarnished admission of a failure so complete, so absolute that it had reshaped their very soul. Kalen looked at the image of the Vigil Asterisk, and for the first time he did not see a threat. He saw a scar of unimaginable scale left on the psyche of an entire species. So you built a ship, Xyler stated, its logical processors struggling to reconcile the data. A monument, but why a warship? Why imbue it with such destructive potential? It is an inefficient and contradictory method of memorialization. Because a simple stone monument would be a lie, Eva said, her voice hardening with a sudden intensity. A placid memorial would allow us to forget the true nature of the horror. It would soften the edges, romanticize the sacrifice. Future generations would see it and feel pride, not shame. That is a luxury we can never afford. The vigil is not a weapon to be used against others. It is a weapon pointed eternally at ourselves. Its power systems are not designed for conquest. They are designed for demonstration. Its purpose is not to fight, but to teach, to show. A new wave of unease spread through the conclave. Show what? Olena whispered, her light trembling. Eva Rostova's calm expression finally broke, replaced by one of profound, solemn gravity. The truth, she said. The unfiltered, unadulterated truth of our fall. We built it so that we would never be able to lie to ourselves about who we were and what we are capable. We believe that a species that cannot face its own darkness is doomed to be consumed by it. We invited ourselves here to this conclave because you stand at a precipice. You see a potenti. Our threat and your first instinct is division, fear, and a call to arms. It is a familiar path. We humbly request you allow us to show you where that path can lead. She did not wait for an answer. She simply nodded to someone off-screen. A low hum emanated from the communication plate, a sound that seemed to resonate not in the air, but directly within the minds of everyone present. The holographic image of the conclave chamber flickered. The obsidian walls, the swirling nebulae, the assembled delegates, they all dissolved, replaced by a new reality. It was not a hologram. It was something more. A psychic projection, a sensory immersion so total, so real that Kalen felt the grit of blasted earth under his feet and the sting of chemical-laced wind on his carapace. They were standing in the ruins of a city. Human architecture, vast and once beautiful, was now skeletal, clawing at a blood-red sky choked with ash. The air tasted of metal and sorrow. He could feel it, the psychic residue of unimaginable death, a silent scream that would echo for eternity. This was Earth. The projection shifted. They were aboard the bridge of a human warship, smaller than the Asterisk Vigil but no less deadly. Through the forward view screen, a fleet of other human ships, nearly identical, was approaching. There was no communication, only the cold, hard logic of weapons lock. Kalen felt the thrum of the ship's engines, the rising panic of the human crew, their grim, determined faces. These were not aliens they were preparing to fight. They were their own brothers, their own sisters. An order was given, and the universe outside the viewport erupted in silent, blinding flashes of light. Lances of pure energy tore through hulls. Explosions blossomed like malevolent flowers in the void. Kalen felt the psychic shockwave of every life extinguished, the terror, the fury, the sudden, final nothingness. He was a high lord of a warrior race, but what he was witnessing felt obscene. There was no honor here, no glory, only the methodical industrial process of self-immolation. The scene shifted again, a planet once green and blue, now a mottled canvas of fire and gray. From orbit, kinetic rods, the weapons of a god, rained down upon continents. Kalen saw cities vanish in plumes of vaporized rock. He felt the earth-shattering impact, the terror of millions incinerated in a single, silent moment. He witnessed biological weapons unleashed, nanite plagues that dissolved flesh from bone, turning entire populations into gray sludge. He saw soldiers in sealed armor fighting their own kind in the poisoned ruins of their shared history, their weapons so advanced that they tore at the fabric of spacetime itself with each discharge. Throughout the vision, there was no narrative, no explanation, only the raw, sensory experience. Olena's light had condensed into a tight, weeping ball. Xyler's energy form was flickering violently, a sign of its logic processors being pushed past their breaking point by the sheer, unquantifiable irrationality of the events. And Kalen felt his warrior's soul being stripped bare. The Cathar waged war for territory, for resources, for the sacred honor of the Imperium. Their wars were brutal, but they were purposeful. They were an expression of life, of a species willed to dominate and survive. This was the opposite. This was an expression of a death wish. A species turning all of its genius, all of its creativity, all of its passion toward the singular goal of its own annihilation. The final vision was the quietest and the most horrifying. They stood on the scarred surface of a dead moon, looking back at the shrouded, silent form of Earth. A handful of humans in worn, patched environment suits stood beside them, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollowed out by a loss too vast to comprehend. They were not celebrating a victory. They were mourning a failure so total that it had cost them their past and nearly their future. The silence of that moment, the profound, empty silence of a species that had screamed itself hoarse, was more terrifying than any battle. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the projection faded. The conclave chamber returned. The obsidian walls, the swirling nebulae, the stunned and silent delegates. The air was thick with the phantom smell of ash and the psychic echo of a billion deaths. Kalen was on his knees, his forearms braced against the dais, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had never knelt before, not to an enemy, not to an emperor. But he was kneeling now, humbled not by a show of force, but by a show of weakness. By the terrifying, honest vulnerability of a species that had stared into the abyss of its own nature and refused to blink. No one spoke. The silence stretched for an eternity. The human ambassador, Eva Rostova, remained on the screen, her face a mask of solemnity. She had not needed to say another word. The Vigil Asterisk had spoken for her. It had told its story. It was Olena who broke the silence. Her form, still dim, pulsed with a soft, empathetic light. "You carry this memory with you always," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It is the foundation upon which we are built," Eva replied. "Every child learns this history. Every leader is tested against it. We do not fear external threats because we know with absolute certainty that the greatest threat to our existence will always come from within. Our ethics, our laws, our entire social structure are all designed to act as fire breaks against our own worst impulses. We are calm because we have seen the alternative. We are logical because we have seen where unchecked emotion leads. We are united because we have paid the ultimate price for our division." Xyler the Signian spoke next, its voice strained, the clean tones of its modulator now filled with a strange static. "Your vessel, the Vigil Asterisk, the impossible energy signature. The stabilized singularity. We theorized such a power source would require a cataclysmic event to forge, an event on a scale that would shred local spacetime. It did," Eva confirmed quietly. "The final weapon of the war was a temporal device designed to erase an entire enemy fleet from the timeline. It was a miscalculation. It backfired. It didn't erase anything. Instead, it tore a scar in causality itself, a wound in reality centered on our solar system." The energy that powers the Vigil asterisk is a controlled, siphoned leak from that scar. It is literally fueled by the temporal echo of our greatest sin. That is why it seems both ancient and new. It exists in a state of perpetual temporal flux, a constant reminder of the moment we almost broke time itself. The revelation settled upon the conclave with the weight of a dying star. The warship that shouldn't exist. It was not a boastful title. It was a literal description. It was a ghost, powered by the ghost of a moment that should never have happened. Kalen slowly rose to his feet. He looked at the other delegates. He saw his own shock and awe reflected in the multifaceted eyes of the insectoid Zen, in the gaseous swirls of the Voltan collective, in the crystalline faces of the Petran hegemony. Their own squabbles, their petty rivalries and ancient grudges seemed like the games of children in the shadow of the truth they had just witnessed. His call for a preemptive strike, his warrior's pride, it all felt so hollow, so dangerously naive. He had wanted to destroy a monument. He had advocated for the obliteration of a history lesson paid for in blood and fire. He stepped forward, his heavy footfalls the only sound in the chamber. He faced the holographic image of Eva Rostova. The High Lord of the Cathar Imperium, a being bred for conquest and war, bowed his head. It was a gesture of profound, unconditional respect, a gesture no Cathar had ever made to another species in their recorded history. "Human," Kalen said, his voice raw with an emotion he could not name. "You have shown us not your strength but your soul, and it is a thing of terror and of beauty. We were wrong. You are not infants. You are elders, elders in sorrow." He turned to the rest of the conclave. "I withdraw my motion for military action," he declared, his voice ringing with newfound conviction. "I propose that we listen, that for the first time in the history of this consortium we cease our endless posturing and we simply listen to what this species has to teach us." A murmur of assent rippled through the chamber. One by one the other delegates signified their agreement. A new era was dawning in the galaxy, not one brought about by conquest or treaty, but by a shared, visceral understanding. The human ambassador watched, a flicker of something, relief perhaps or hope in her tired eyes. "The vigil serves another purpose," Eva said, her voice drawing their attention back. "We built it to remember our past, but we also built it to safeguard the future. Its long-range sensors are the most sophisticated we have ever constructed. They are not designed to detect fleets or weapons. They are designed to detect patterns. Specifically the patterns of a species on the verge of self-destructive conflict." Kalen felt a prickle of unease. "You have been watching us," he stated. It was not an accusation. "We have been observing," Eva corrected gently. "The Vigil asterisk was placed at the edge of your space because our analysis showed that the consortium was reaching a critical point of internal friction. Your political discourse, your military posturing, your escalating rivalries. It was all beginning to resonate with the same patterns we saw in the centuries leading up to our own fall. We did not come here to interfere. We came to offer a warning in the only way we knew how." As she spoke, a soft alert chimed from her console. It was a quiet, almost apologetic sound, yet it cut through the silence of the chamber with the sharpness of a blade. Eva Rostova looked down at her display. For the first time since she had appeared, her professional calm was shattered. A flicker of genuine, unadulterated shock crossed her features, followed by something that looked chillingly like fear. "Eva Rostova?" Olena asked, sensing the sudden shift in the human's emotional state. "What is it?" Eva looked up from her console, her eyes wide. She looked not at the delegates, but past them, as if peering into the vast, empty void beyond the chamber walls. "The sensors," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The Vigil asterisk's primary purpose is to be a monument. Its secondary purpose is to be an early warning system for species like yours, to detect the psychic resonance of large-scale internal conflict." She took a breath, her composure returning, but her eyes retained their haunted look. "It has a tertiary function, a classified, theoretical protocol. It was designed to search for something else, a signal we discovered fragments of in our own ruined historical archives. A signal that ancient texts referred to only as the Great Silence, a force that, according to the myths, is drawn to the chaos and psychic death screams of species that tear themselves apart." Zyler's form pulsed erratically. "A predator that feeds on civil war? That is illogical. No such life form is known to exist." "It was considered a myth by us as well," Eva said, her voice grim. "A cautionary tale, a ghost story to frighten children. The protocol was a fail-safe, a 1 in a trillion shot." The Vigil asterisk was programmed to listen for that specific hypothetical energy signature. For 10,000 years it has listened, and it has heard nothing. She turned her gaze back to the conclave, and the full, terrifying weight of the moment descended upon them. "Until now," she said, "the psychic energy generated by the consortium's fear and aggression focused on the Vigil asterisk for the last 3 cycles. It has been a beacon, A dinner bell ringing in the dark. The signal is not. And it's responding. She manipulated her console. The central hologram of the Vigil asterisk was replaced by a star chart of the galaxy. It was a familiar image to them all. But then a new symbol appeared far out in the intergalactic void at the very edge of the map. It was a faint crimson icon pulsing like a malevolent heart. And beside it, a trajectory line was being calculated, a line that pointed directly, unerringly, toward the heart of the consortium, toward them. "It is ancient," Eva said, her voice now a low, steady drumbeat of warning. "And it is vast, and it is now awake, and it is coming." In the silent conclave chamber, surrounded by the holographic ghosts of a long-dead war, the assembled species of the galaxy looked upon the image of their true, common enemy. The petty squabbles, the borders, the treaties, all of it dissolved into insignificance. High Lord Kalen looked from the approaching threat to the image of the human ambassador, and then to the memory of the impossible warship. The Vigil asterisk, the ship that shouldn't exist, the tomb that had become a warning, the monument to a dead war that was about to become the first line of defense in a new one. Outside the viewport on the human vessel, the Vigil asterisk began to change. The light-devouring hull shimmered. The weapon emplacements, dormant for millennia, began to glow not with the energy of destruction, but with a new, brilliant blue light of pure power. They were reconfiguring, their purpose shifting. They were not charging to fire. They were transforming the entire vessel into a colossal shield generator, a bulwark against the coming night. "That ship is a testament to our greatest failure," Eva Rostova's voice echoed in the chamber, a voice that was no longer just human, but the voice of a sentinel, a guardian forged in the fires of self-destruction. "Its existence was meant to ensure we would have a future. We never considered that its purpose was to ensure that we would all have one together." Her eyes met Kalen's, a warrior speaking to a warrior across the void. "The great silence is coming," she said. "The only question now is whether we will face it with the wisdom of survivors or the foolishness of a species that has learned nothing." The crimson icon on the map pulsed again, a little brighter this time, a little closer. And in the profound silence of the conclave, the races of the galaxy, for the first time in their history, were truly, completely, and terrifyingly united.